afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on energy, ESG, and business. Why should SMEs and young professionals care? My name is Isabella Esekaibe, and I'm the Administrative Assistant at GLP Law Practice. We're excited to have you join this important conversation. Before we dive in, allow me to introduce the firm behind this webinar. GLP Law Practice is a full-service law firm dedicated to helping businesses, individuals, and families with excellent delivery of legal services, build strong legal foundations, and stay compliant. Our mission is to empower businesses, families, and individuals to thrive in today's evolving legal and business environment. Some of our services are legal advisory, regulatory compliance, employment and labor law, corporate and commercial law, criminal litigation, energy resources law, dispute resolution, family law, among others. To moderate today's session is our esteemed moderator, Mrs. Deborah Lucky-Dikor, lead counsel at GLP Law Practice. She is a seasoned legal practitioner specializing in energy law, corporate governance, and dispute resolution. She works closely with startups, SMEs, and non-profit organizations, helping them stay compliant, build suitable governance structures, and well-positioned for growth. Without much ado, let me hand over to Mrs. Deborah Lucky-Dikor. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Isabella. Thank you, and welcome everyone again for today's webinar. We're glad to have you. I see our esteemed panelists already in the room. Thank you so much for also joining bright and early. And energy, ESG, and business are deeply connected. Whether you're a startup founder, an SME leader, or a young professional looking to build a future-ready career, or pivot as the case may be, understanding these concepts can open doors to growth, investment, and long-term success. This is a knowledge-sharing webinar. We're glad to have you here. And if you've ever wondered how energy policies and sustainability affect your business or career, then stay tuned to the end of the webinar. Engage as much as possible and bring your questions to our distinguished panelists. By the end of the webinar, every participant should gain valuable insight into Nigerian energy transition policies and governance, ESG-driven business opportunities, and how partnerships can become a game changer for professionals and business growth. Our panelists will, as much as possible, stay within the scope of our conversation today, given how wide and broad the concepts of energy, ESG, and business are. Today we have a distinguished panel of experts who will be speaking to us from their wealth of experience, diverse background, on why SMEs and young professionals should care about energy, ESG, and business. This session is not just about theory, right? It's about real-world applications that can help bridge knowledge gaps for participants to stay ahead in evolving business landscape. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat box, right? We'll be taking note of the questions. And if you will, put them down so during the Q&A, you can as well ask your questions, right? Let's make this conversation one that will add real value to you. The links to our speaker bio will be posted in the chat box. So Isabella, please go on and post the links to the speaker bio so we can go right into the business of the day, right? So we have three esteemed speakers for this webinar. And we have Ms. Joy Osomiamhe-O. She's a development professional, just energy transition and sustainability specialist. Ms. Joy, we're happy to have you here on board today. We also have Dr. Eddy Wifa, an energy and natural resources law lecturer at the University of Aberdeen. Thank you, Dr. Eddy, for joining us in today's conversation. And Dr. David Editang, the General Manager, Government Relations and Stakeholders Management for Sub-Saharan region at Fairtex Group. Thank you, Dr. David, for joining us today for this conversation. We're happy to have you. And to kick off this conversation, right, I know our participants are inclusive, eager and waiting to learn from your wealth of experiences. So to kick off today's conversation, we'll start with Dr. Eddy Wifa. Nigeria's energy transition, as we all know, is no longer a future goal. So many years ago, it was something we're looking forward to, but today it's here, right here with us. And we can see it at play through several notable initiatives and activities in Nigeria, such as the implementation of the Energy Transition Plan and development of renewable mini-grids. We see it as the promotion of compressed natural gas, CNG vehicles, right? We see operationalization, like the Dangote refinery is now at play, and collaboration with international partners. So while this was a thing of the past, it's no longer there. But despite these bold moves and ambitious policies in the energy industry, Nigeria's path to a sustainable energy future is still a bit complex, right? And there are significant challenges that persist in the implementation, governance, and ensuring that these reforms deliver real benefits to businesses and citizens of Nigeria. So Dr. Eddy Wifa, from your perspective, we would like to hear from you. What are the most pressing governance and policy challenges currently affecting the energy transition?
All right. Thank you, Debbie, for the invitation. And again, it's great to be here and to learn from you, David and Joy. I think sometimes we oversimplify energy transition, and I've had a lot of people talk about it in different sectors. But really, it is a very, very complex concept. And to explain it, I would provide three scenarios, right? So first, energy transition or transformation. It's really the shift from one energy source to another. And it didn't start today. So once upon a time, we were using, whale oil, right, to burn the lamps, provide energy, provide light. And then it evolved to coal. And then as the industrial revolution picked up, we then got into crude oil and things like that. So the energy transition didn't just start overnight. It's something that has always been coming. And I think there's a growing realization that energy transition is not simply a switch where we can just go from A to B. As a result of a number of factors, the energy demand, political, social, economic factors impeding or accelerating the transition. So I'll give you three scenarios. Three scenarios would be, A, the developed Western advanced energy jurisdictions that have significantly grown in energy source and energy diversification, but have also significantly contributed to the pollution that we all have seen today, and that is category A. There's also category B that you would say these are emerging energy jurisdictions, countries that are just beginning to find, energy, oil, you name it. And their parameters and scenarios or indicators would be largely different from A. And in those cases, they would be maximizing whatever energy resources they could lay their hands on. And then you've got, and countries like that would be, Mozambique, Guyana, Tanzania, and the list goes on. But then you'd have countries like Nigeria that are somehow find themselves in the middle, in the sense that they are mature to a very large extent, particularly onshore where easy oil could have been captured. Of course, less mature offshore. But over the years, over many decades, they haven't maximized the oil resources in the same way as the mature or advanced energy systems would have. I was saying it the other day that what most jurisdictions go to Norway to learn, which is known as the Norwegian model, was actually first adopted in Nigeria. So it was originally the Nigerian model. And so once you have these three scenarios of these three jurisdictions trying to transition in one form or the other, you can easily tell what the dynamics and the challenges would be. For Nigeria as a country, you could see that the same problems abound. If you've got energy crisis despite having enormous energy resources, you're energy poor. And you're not just energy poor, you're fuel poor. So we've got energy poverty, but we've also got fuel poverty. Energy poverty is the limited on energy resources that almost half the population of sub-Saharan Africa do not have access to energy. But there's fuel poverty in the sense that people are spending a large chunk of their earnings on providing themselves with energy, with fuel, and the resources to do the things that they need to do. Not just Nigeria, even here in the UK, there is some element of fuel poverty, particularly in relation to single mothers. So you can see the dynamics at play here, that different jurisdictions are influenced by different things. In Europe, most of the energy transition was influenced largely by, of course, climate change played a significant role, but the Russia-Ukraine war equally played a significant role in ensuring transition, because a number of countries in Europe were dependent on Russia. And once you saw the dissatisfaction with Russia as a result of the war, people started realizing that they didn't want to depend on Russia as much as they would. So you see that globally, Daniel Yegin tries to paint that map and those scenarios, that there are different scenarios to energy transition, and every individual country would have to pitch their tent on the basis of the available resources, on the basis of the available technology, on the basis of the available energy needs and energy demands. And all of these things will influence how fast or slow that transition happens. More specifically, for a country like Nigeria, there are very interesting dynamics that means that energy transition, as much as we see the rhetoric in the sense that, yes, there is the acknowledgement of the indicators that would influence energy transition, the reality of that transition isn't exactly what it should be. I'll take, for example, the first onshore wind farm in Nigeria. I think it's in Nasarawa State. It took so long for it to build. Now, even after building it, believe it or not, it hasn't functioned despite the millions and millions of dollars that were pumped into it. I've seen conversations between the Ministry of Environment and the European Commissions on carbon capture and storage, on green hydrogen, and all of these things. But the reality is the political dynamics and our dependence on oil has impeded the energy transition in Nigeria. Now, this is not to say whether it should happen or it shouldn't. I think the fundamental question would be, how do we gather our energy sources? How do we resolve energy poverty? How do we resolve fuel poverty? And until we're able to deal with the more substantial question of providing energy, the transition will continue to remain bleak. But unfortunately, we still see that we are being pulled in different directions, because the politics of it is really, it's really difficult to overcome. The dependence on oil is going to be a challenge continuously. The technology, the presence and the availability of that technology is equally going to be a presence. So if we don't have this level of technology transfer that would enable us transition, it's not going to work. In the early days of offshore wind development, the UK was the highest offshore wind installed, but now it's been overtaken by China, and most of the offshore wind turbines are now being produced in China. So if you could see how, on one hand, you could be strong, but if you don't take advantage of the technology, of the resources that are available to you, we wouldn't go anywhere. In terms of governance, we're still dealing with a number of impeding factors. We don't know, questions around the data. How many people are experiencing energy poverty? What is the ratio? How do we get this energy closer to the people? There is some effort at diversifying, but because of how large the country is, the scale isn't measurable. We're still hearing grid collapse and all of those things. So I think until we are able to deal with those very fundamental questions, energy transition would still remain, bleak, in my opinion, for a country like Nigeria. You're on mute, Debbie.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for sharing so passionately about the subject matter. We hear you. We hear you talk about the resources, which are the technology, the needs of the people, and data, right? There's need to capture all of this to be able to really come in and know how Nigeria can effectively uh, play in this space of energy transition, following the scenarios you gave from those countries that have gone ahead, those that are coming behind, and where Nigeria currently play a role. So yeah, thank you, we hear that. I believe as we progress, we'll deep dive into it. But I would like you to talk about some global insights, like these countries that have successfully, like you mentioned the A scenario and the B, but you didn't really capture the C. I would like you to capture the C. I'm sure some participants here will also like to hear the country that falls in that category.
So A, where first those advanced energy jurisdictions, that would be your UK, Europe, and US, and the list goes on, that have on one hand polluted, significantly in terms of contributions to climate change, but at the same time they've significantly advanced in terms of their energy growth. Category B would be countries like, for example, Nigeria kind of sits in between those countries. So you've got countries like Nigeria they have the resources, they've had it for decades. Unfortunately, a number of governance issues has meant they haven't accelerated or growth or even maximized the resources that they have, not to then talk of accelerating or fast tracking or leapfrogging the transition. And then you've got the category C countries who are emerging countries, in the global south. So you'll be looking at countries like Guyana, Mozambique, Tanzania, who are only just discovering oil and are screaming, well, we're only just discovering these energy resources and we need them to grow. And those are countries that have, not polluted in a way and have not gotten the oil for a long period of time. So countries like Uganda, for example, would easily flow within that category. And so it's the dynamics of these three countries and understanding those dynamics. If you read down here against the map, you understand that these three countries are influenced by different factors. Now, I think one thing to clarify is that even countries in category A that we all tout as advanced and they've got it all, it's not exactly the case. They have a number of factors that would impede the transition. So, for example, in the UK here, we're dealing with energy crisis. Our energy bills are skyrocketing. Now we have the energy. We have the energy, no doubt, but we have it at a very, very expensive, at a cost. So it's significantly expensive. And that's why we now have full poverty. All right. So you have it, energy security, then it's very expensive. So you're dealing with an energy dilemma in that sense. So we're caught between how fast can we build wind farms with all the issues of intermittency and storage, as opposed to drilling in the North Sea and maximizing economic recovery. And you'd see that different governments at different times are pulling at different strings depending on where the political tensions are. So if a government comes in and he says that my goal would be to drill. So for example, the former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak would have wanted to do that. And that was his intention. But then you've got a new Prime Minister who is saying, no, energy transition is everything. And then he's creating the Great British Energy, which is an government-owned energy company to accelerate the transition. Now, even they have seen that it's not exactly as easy as we thought it would be, because the cost of building wind turbines, installing the plan. I mean, it takes over 10 years to go from concept to full installation and production. And so, for that reason alone, they've now designated offshore wind farms as a national critical infrastructure. And once something is designated a national critical infrastructure, it basically means that, one, they will try to shrink the time that is required and then build as fast as possible. But then you start dealing with all the issues around political economy of speed. So you can see that even for advanced jurisdictions, it's not exactly as easy as one would have expected it to be. But they don't want to rely on Russia for oil, for gas, because what it basically means is as long as you continue to give Russia sanctions, they continue to turn off the tap. And they did it with one of the countries not too long ago, and it was darkness all around. So the reason for the transition here, as much as there's a climate change and sustainability driver, is really because there's a energy political dynamics at play that means I don't want to depend on my enemy for my energy, because here, energy security is national security.
Yeah.
So, so those sort of contexts are useful in understanding the transition broadly.
Yeah, so those are interesting conversation, and I see Ms. Joy was really nodding to the conversation. I perceive she has some things to add. So Dr. Eddy, will come back to you, but let's hear from Ms. Joy. Ms. Joy, you've heard Dr. Eddy. What do you have to add to the conversation on energy transition?
I would agree with the fact that the different regional climes and different needs. So basically, the need for energy transition in the West is also different. So he made a very punching factor of the political play that has, and I agree with that completely. As much as we want to align with net zero and the Paris Agreement for the temperature, but it's also, there's a political tussle in terms of why the West are very, very, very big on the transition, because they want to have alternative energy means. So when it's my turn, I would elaborate on the transition and why, and but yeah, I was just going to give it a talk.
We can just take it from there, right? So we understand the energy transition as it is not just about shifting from fossil fuels, right, to renewable energy, like Dr. Eddy also mentioned while he was talking, that it's a shift from one source to the other. But we understand also that it is doing so equitably, not just a shift from one source to the other, right? So ensuring no one is left behind, which is why the just energy transition in Nigeria means balancing sustainability with socio-economic realities, especially as millions still lack access to affordable energy in Nigeria, looking at how dynamic it is, right? Different countries still have their own dynamics and tussle to this energy transition discussion. But at the same time, businesses and investors are increasingly focused on this just energy transition and ESG principles, not just as a compliance requirement, but as a driver for long-term profitability. So we would like to hear from you, Ms. Joy, taking from where you stopped and taking us into the just energy transition and ESG metrics. How can ESG principles help businesses attract funding, reduce risk?
A lot has really emerged in recent times, but let's go to the basics of what ESG is. ESG is environment, social and governance, which I believe was born out of some health and safety there's some health and safety issues that were not properly managed in the past by the big oil and gas firms, and so ESG has come for as a metric, so as an accountability metrics to ensure that their CSRs are properly done. So now let's go back into just energy transition and how it relates to Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement in 2015 says that we should reduce emission to be able to manage the temperature of the earth. What is sustainability? Sustainability is the people and planet striving together to coexist and strive together. So we cannot allow the planet suffer while the people are striving. With my lens as a CSR professional, CSR project delivery professional in over 10 years, so we have to embrace ESG because it gives our CSR engagement better accountability. So I would now move into just energy transition, because I sit right in the middle, and I feel that traditional energy will still be a source of 80% source of energy even as at 2050. So it is highly imperative that we we see it from that perspective, and not say we are just going to embrace a transition without looking at the nitty-gritties of the nuance. I am not a pro-transition, and neither am I a let's not transition. And let's look at the word transition. In the bid for just energy transition or transition, I would quote the OPEC Secretary General when he says that so far, energy transition has been more of addition. It has never been subtraction. So in that light, because if we want to take out and say we are taking out a particular energy source, there will be so much ripple effect on the people. So and still ties back to sustainability, saying that the people and the planet must strive. Now, having said that, we will now be looking at the fact of additional energy. Okay, now a practical example is myself, for example. My energy bill used to be about 68 pounds, 70 pounds max, 75 pounds a month. But now I'm spending about 200 pounds every month. When I look at my bill and I'm like, what's going on? I'm in the UK, I'm out of the UK. I do a lot of traveling around the world doing public speaking engagements, and I am spending as much as 200 pounds, even if I'm not here. So what I'm saying is these are the ripple effects of the imposed transition on the system. And if you see out and recently BP has released millions of pounds into going to drill, the Net Zero Alliance, the Banking Federation for Net Zero Alliance in America. A lot of big banks are pulling out of the Net Zero Alliance because there was a lot of capital wasn't going into traditional energy for a while because of the ESG accountability metrics that oil and gas firms need to meet into. So every energy sources we're trying to say, yes, we are saying we understand that you want to drill, but can you also give us alternative means of energy that you can also provide while you want to still drill? So it means that you must drill in a more environmentally friendly way, socially friendly way, and give us a proper governance structure on how this drilling would not affect the people and the planet. So that's the whole ESG. But the political will is changing the dynamics, and it's affecting everybody. With the emergence of Trump, a lot of shift is happening. So because it has affected the US, which is the powerhouse of the financial powerhouse of the world, it is coming down to Europe and definitely hitting Africa. And yes, even prior to when Europe and America was pushing the agenda of net zero and said energy transition, some continents were still pushing back. I belong to the African Energy Chambers. I'll tell you for free that we were pro drill, baby drill from the African Energy Chambers. And as an ESG professional, I always come on board and say, yes, good, we are drilling baby drill. Good, we are still going to be 80% dependent on traditional energy, but we still need to also be accountable to the people and the planet. And that's why we must put in measurable governance structure to ensure that while we are drilling, the society or the people are not being affected negatively. Go and see what's happening in the Niger Delta for those that are from there that have been privileged to see how the ecological degradation of the impact of not proper the system in which they operate in the country. It's and especially I will not say for the regulated licensees, for those that are even operating illegally, there's a lot of harm causes to the environment. So we are trying to, speak to the government. We're trying to ensure that there's an aggregation to make sure that it's not just laws, because they've come up with the PIA Act. The PIA Act Section 3 talks about the community engagement and all of that. For my country, Nigeria, what's happening in the West is completely different. But I want to believe that majority of the people on the score are looking at it from a Nigerian lens. But it's not today that we started creating laws or policies. The most important thing is ensuring enforcement of these laws and policies are very important. And in light of all of these conversations, I would like to give credit to C4All has done a lot in terms of
Okay.
ensuring energy transition. So if you want me to cut short now, I would stop.
Yeah, so that's fine. We'll come back to you. Just hold on to that thought, right?
Okay.
We would like to know more about C4 in the course of the conversation, right? But let's bring this home. You were talking about the political wheels changing the dynamics of the entire energy transition conversation, right? And how the ripple effect is biting. Talking about your own energy bill as it was before and what it is currently, right? Knowing that it's coming home, like you said, started from the US, the Europe, and now it's definitely coming to Africa. I would like to ask, what do you think Nigeria's current policies and the regulatory frameworks, do they adequately support this just energy transition, right? You rightly mentioned earlier when you were talking that there are laws and there are laws, right? But do you think the ones we have currently, do they adequately support it? Right? And if not, what are the key reforms you would recommend to attract private investors and investments that will make our laws and our regulatory framework effective?
Is that for me?
Yes, you, Joy. And Dr. Editang can jump in while you're speaking, right? I know it's something he would like to talk about, so you go on.
Okay, for me, just energy transition, I would want to reiterate that I said earlier that I like to key into the Secretary General of the OPEC description of just energy transition. It's not about taking anything out. It's about addition, alternative means of energy. It's not about, so when people say transition, in the literal sense, people think we are transitioning from fossil fuel and we are going to go green. No, we are creating alternative means of energy. So basically, it's a World Bank agenda. They've pushed it together. They have the Rockefeller Foundation. They've just commissioned the project in Tanzania talking about powering Africa in January 27 and 28. The president of Tanzania, the Rockefeller Foundation, World Bank, C4All, Global Alliance for People and Planet. They came together and made a commitment for the just energy transition investment in powering Africa. It's called the Mission 300 agenda. So what I'm about to say, or I don't want to lose my line of thoughts. It's about addition, and I think locally as a country we are doing the NSIA. Is it NSIA? It says Nigerian Sovereign Investment. Is it authority or agency? I'm not very sure, but it's NSIA has a commitment to the transition to clean energy. The REA, they're doing a lot of projects. I don't know how much you follow the Rural Electric Agency. They're doing a lot of projects on the clean energy transition that I am aware, and I'm part of some of them within the EEP. The country as a whole has an economic crunch that has made them switch from PMS to CNG. And that is also in line with energy transition, because for us as Africans, the gas is the cleanest form of energy that we can transition into before we start talking about alternative means. And that has come to stay. So on this junction, without taking too much time, I could pass the mic to Dr. Editang. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Joy, for sharing. Dr. Editang, taking from where Ms. Joy stopped, you heard her speak about the ripple effects, I would like to put it that way, of the imposed energy transition, right? So taking it from there and looking at it from the perspective of evolving energy and ESG landscape, right? So the energy and ESG landscape, it's evolving. So what do you have to add to the conversation so far?
So, good day, everyone. It's a pleasure being here once again. Am I audible? I guess
Yes,
I am.
you are.
Okay. So, I would like to say, was born a leap from Ms. Joy. She stated that the Rockefeller Foundation. So the question I would ask, why don't our billionaires, the foundations? Because we're looking at the political will. We have good laws, we have good frameworks, but implementation, I agree with her, has been a problem. Nigeria is filled with so many laws, but the implementation and looking at the whole landscape, you see the political will to make this work out is also a challenge. We're talking about it's an economic approach, yes, from PMS or the fossil fuel now to cleaner energy, which is the CNG that we are all going out. So my question would be, why don't if I would suggest like situations whereby like the governors forum or state governments, why don't they adopt this and see how they can push this in the states? I mean, conversion centers, being the mother stations. Yeah, if the government can holistically buy up this idea, it would be, it would be far, far better. Why don't our, billionaires, our top big boys, and why don't they, why don't the foundation support? You see, let's take a clue from when the AIDS epidemic. You see where you have Belinda and Belinda and what's the name, and also Bill Gates Foundation. Invest massively on malaria, invest massively on AIDS. So the question would be, why don't our billionaires also support such noble noble venture as well as looking at where we have foundations and big foundations support cleaner energy. We've not really seen that. So I would think it's a just cause. It's something that we should own. It's something we should own. And also in line with Dr. Eddy, yeah, we are really pushing for a just transition, because we have abundance. There's also a political mix to all this. So we would need to use what we have to support our own ecosystem, because truly and frankly, truly, it's quite different from what you have in Europe. It's quite different from what you have in other climes. So we need to look at what we have and use what we have and support our economy. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Dr. Editang, for sharing that. I hear you talk about the Governors Forum. If we could just bring these ideas to them and they buy it, right, it would be to go a long way in helping us own what we have. So taking it from there, right, I would like you to talk more on how we can actually sell these ideas to the billionaires, like you rightly mentioned, the people that matters. How do we take these ideas to them? Collaboration has become more than just a buzzword these days, right? It is now a strategic necessity, right? So these are what we have on the table. We don't just want the billionaires to take their money to go spend abroad, but we want them to empower young professionals. We want them to empower businesses. And these ideas are there. Nigerians have ideas on how to transform the energy industry. We hear how these renewable mini grids are coming up. So people are coming up with different ideas to help the transition. But like you said, we have to own it and the government have to buy into the idea. So how can we make this a game changer for young professionals and businesses?
Okay, thank you very much, Debbie. I would say our energy industry is one of the most lucrative and highly competitive sector. And an African proverb says, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you need collaboration. So that's it's an African proverb. I think our forefathers, in all wisdom, crafted that proverb to say the imperativeness of collaboration. And I would say for young professionals and every economy, a sustainable economy, it's when you have flourishing SMEs. Truly, every economy that should be should be very sustainable, or very protective, or very efficient, should have a reasonable size of SMEs, because that's when you can see an organization or a country or an ecosystem really healthy. But we need to understand before the SMEs or young professional or the issue of partnership. How? Because as an SME, you want to go into the market, you want to go into the energy industry. One critical question you would ask: how do you partner? You're just starting. I think I would just really income couple of things that you would watch out for. From my own perspective, I think One of such, you need to understand the value that you as an SME is bringing to the table. I would say, for instance, as an SME, you want to partner, you want to collaborate with a bigger or big player. Well, what you need to understand, what value do you bring to the table? Now, you need to look at agility, you need to look at innovation. How innovative are your, ideas to bring to have that, that handshake? You need to understand deep community dynamics. Now, one of the reasons why the playbook in which Renaissance is buying, one of the playbook in which Renaissance is buying or bought over SPD, it's one of the key things we'll be looking at, or they look at. One of the unique selling points with local expertise and deep understanding of the community dynamics, because SPDC had mirage of issues, but we have a local companies or local company that say we have deep understanding of this community dynamics and we know how we can do. We have deep understanding of the regulatory requirements, much more, as we would say, much more than a foreign entity. Now, an SME should look at deep understanding of these dynamics, and critically, they should identify the right partnership. Not every partnership is workable. So you to understand what's the right partnership, they should align with your strength. And another thing, young professionals or SMEs will need to do is to position themselves, how to ensure compliance. You need to position yourself with regulatory bodies, understanding the framework, of the NDPRA, the framework that borders the Logic Act, the framework that also borders regulatory bodies like the NUPRC. You need to also, as an SME, you need to understand the power of network. How well as a SME, how well do you network? How well do you have industry, networking? How do you belong to local professional groups and all of that? These are in a nutshell what I think SMEs and young professionals could leverage and for partnership or collaboration with big corporations. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Editang, for sharing. I understand from what you said, one way that, or some of the things that SMEs and young professionals can do to leverage on the opportunities available. You mentioned they need to understand the value they offer, what they bring to the table.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
That's more like a starting point. And their community dynamics, they need to understand community dynamics, engage with the players, local expertise, the Renaissance SPDC case study, right?
Yeah.
Strength, the key factor they look into. So I would say SMEs and young professionals on this call should actually pay attention to these transitions. First was with Mobi and Seplat, and then we saw the Renaissance and SPDC. So there are some key factors they were looking at, which you have mentioned, and one of which is the local expertise that these people had to offer. So it's something that we will need to really pay attention to. But while you were talking, you also made mention they need to position themselves to ensure compliance. And at this point, I would like to bring in Dr. Eddy, right? Dr. Eddy, many businesses in Nigeria see ESG as just another compliance requirement rather than a business driver, right? In your view, how can SMEs and young professionals ensure ESG expectations? How can they maintain and not be on the other side? Like, how can they stay compliant and at the same time ensure profitability for their businesses?
Sorry, take that question again.
Okay, so many businesses in Nigeria see ESG as another compliance requirement. I know Dr. Editang made mention of this while he was speaking. They need to ensure they stay compliant and understand the regulatory framework in the country. What are the regulatory framework at play? As a legal practitioner on this call, though you're not lecturing education space, but I'd like you to talk about it. What do you think, in your view, SMEs can do to ensure compliance and at the same time stay profitable?
All right. So again, I completely agree with the points Joy and David makes. Really, really helpful. You can't undermine the role of networking, of being in the right places, of technology advancements, and all of those things. But I think at some point we need to be very honest. And sometimes when people put these questions to me, I usually ask, what kind of answer do you want? Do you want the very traditional answer, or do you want the truth? And I'm
Yeah, of
guessing
course.
we want the truth. So first let's look at numbers. NNPC last year declared, I think it was just about $2 billion in profit. And we made about 30 billion we sold crude oil worth about 30 billion and then declared about 2 billion worth of profit. Foreign direct remittances alone of Nigerians abroad is closing in on about 30 billion. The oil industry in Nigeria employs directly about 19,000, put it together, residual and non-direct employment, you'll be looking at close to 70 to 80,000. Of course, there are other benefits along the line. We've done oil for, I think, over 70 years now, and we don't have very much to show for it. It does remind me of my experiences back in Nigeria when our transformers used to blow, right? I was the lawyer on the street that had to go from door to door to take the contributions to fix the transformers. And so while I sit here and I'm asking myself, what about community energy or power generations, right? I have a friend here in the UK who went back to provide power to small scale businesses. So your barber shops, your hairdressing salons, your business centers, and he's making a fortune by providing power, mini grid power, solar powers to most of these small scale businesses. And the reason I say that is because unfortunately we are at a time where we would need to solve our own problems. And if you're in Nigeria, or any of these emerging energy jurisdictions, not necessarily emerging, but of course the circumstances makes us largely dependent on oil and the resources, and as such quite emerging. We should start thinking of how can we solve these energy problems, because that would be the driver. And I give you an example. One onshore wind turbine, a small one, maybe 1 to 2 megawatts, could power about 1,500 homes. And so I think about the possibility of those contributions that I was taking then, and the likelihood of us coming together with, especially now as the energy system is now diversified thanks to the current government. We now have systems of energy democracy in place, whether real or perceived, but at least the regulation allows us to do that. It means that there is the likelihood that we could have come together and put resources together to power my entire D line.
Right.
So we now need to start finding organic ways of solving our own problems, of driving the technology, because that in its way, organically, will create more entrepreneurs, will create more SMEs. And once we have that energy going, you will see businesses beginning to blossom, because without energy, there will be no growth and development, even economically. And so if we continue to wait that, somehow we'll get enough gas and we're flaring everything. And we need to understand that the industry as it currently is designed to empower and enrich a very limited few. And that's a result of existential fragile systems that have been built for decades. And we would not be able to upturn that overnight. So we need to start getting more radical in our thinking of how can we solve problems. The biggest problem is power. Yes, you may wait for Davido's father to build wonderful gas turbines and all of that. But organically within our local jurisdictions, is there something else we can do? Is there a technology in place? Are there pumps? Are there things we can design? And I think that's where institutions like mine and even those back home need to start working together and collaborating to say, how can we transfer these technologies in such a way that they can be more organic? I don't know if you watched there was that movie of on the wind, on the guy, I think was in Kenya or Sierra Leone, who
Yeah,
you
we.
know,
Yeah.
who built his, that was a true, like, it's a true story. It's not,
Yes.
it's, you know, it's a cool movie, but it's a true story.
It's a
And I think,
must-see movie, actually.
sorry?
It's actually a must-see movie.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
it's that kind of thinking we need to get back to. Otherwise, in 10 years, we will still be having the same conversation. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I hear you talk about community energy, right? We need to think about generating our own energy, think of ways to solve our own problems. We know energy is a real problem, is a real challenge, and energy itself is life, right? Imagine those days where we currently study, right? When we're reading, we read with this lantern. I don't know how
Yeah,
people on the
yeah,
call
yeah,
remember what the lantern is, right? We
yeah,
don't have the electric bulbs to power our rooms to study. And I believe that if we get really radical in our thinking, like you said, then there will be some innovative, some ideas that will help us generate our energy, right? Instead of looking at generating energy or waiting for the government to come through for us. Collaboration could come in that guide. So while we're
yeah,
networking, while we're attending conferences, we don't just go mark the calendar or mark present, but see who in the conference you can work with, who are in the conference that have innovative ideas that you can work with. To take it from there, Ms. Joy, in our conversation, you made mention of some projects you were doing in schools. I think let's just tie it in neatly with this conversation about taking our own energy into our hands and seeing how we can encourage innovative thinking, encourage young professionals and business owners to look at some areas, right, where they might not probably have been thinking that they can make something work out of. I don't know if you get that question.
I will try and understand how to tie this in my own view. I won't say it's a
Yeah.
layman view, but I think I'm in between the line as a facilitator. I'm in between the line of being understanding from professionals and understanding how the layman thinks. I would say that in every economy, businesses grow the economy. It's not government. It's not government is supposed to create an enabling environment, but businesses are what drives the growth of every economy. And taking us back to the coalition conversation of saying that individuals can invest, even governments. I could tell you, so if anybody wants to have any projects and they're interested in energy, there are governments that are willing, even in the States, in the Nigeria, that are willing to collaborate with individual mini-grids, innovators, startups, if you want to. So there are a lot of governments now within the States. Governors have come up with just answering to what Dr. Eddy said regarding their government. So if you want to get contact with governments of states that are willing to partner with you to have mini grids, and thanks to Eddy for the statistics on how many megawatts we need to power how many homes, and you can start up with even 1 megawatt, 2 megawatts, 5 megawatts. It depends on the sectoral way you want to invest. If you want to invest it for a community, if you want to invest, as I talked about C4 program agenda, the REA talks about different sectoral investments for energy, of solving our energy crisis. And the truth be told, without energy, nothing works. Agricultural sector would not work. Energy has never worked for us in Africa, and it's time to take power in our hands to make sure that we have sustainable energy so that we can power the economy. So we can invest in with state governments in different ways, by community and doing mini grids for community. Eddy says one of his friends is already doing. I would like to speak to your friend after now offline to see which state he's working and which states I can actually connect him to expand what he already has existing going on. we can do it either by community, like I said, we can do it sectorially. So there's the Energizing Education Initiative program. So the EEP program is to make sure that each schools are powered. So we are starting from the tertiary institutions. So when you see RA rollout projects and they are setting up mini grids of 5 megawatts in different schools, it's because they want the schools to have. You talked about reading with lantern. If you see when we had Clean Energy Day, when you go to my page, I made a documentary on clean energy and how we don't have a fair playing ground from the global south to the global north, because the children in the global south struggle with using candles to try to pass their exam. The standards remain the same. Nobody say because you are from a global north you should from a global south you will do a less complicated exam. We have the same standards in terms of exam. We have to meet all these achievements. And how do we how do we power our human capacity development, our human capital? How do we empower them better? Is to create sustainable energy for all. So energy poverty is a big problem that we have, and it's time to seek collaborations so that we can actually create synergies to drive solutions. The people are key aspects to this. For if you have knowledge gaps, try to read, find a mentor. If you want to get into the space, it was very difficult. I never knew I would be in the energy space today. I started off as someone that was an ex-beauty queen, interested in CSR development, CSR engagement. I worked closely with a lot of banks. I went into education projects, and I realized after giving a lot of spiros, papers, books to schools, the poverty problems remains the same. So what the education system needs to improve is more of infrastructure. And what's the fundamental of this infrastructure is to have clean energy, is to have access to energy. So however the energy comes, they need access to energy to make them self-sufficient. So when they have access to energy, then AI. So conversations that we have in World Economic Forum it's not applicable to third world countries, because everybody's talking about AI, access to technology. So how do we have access to technology when we do not even have access to sustainable energy? On that note, I'm sorry, I will have to run off really soon. My 1 hour here is really elapsed and I need to join something else. But thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much.
Before you run off, we just want to see the participants have questions for you. So you just hang in there. I see a comment in the chat box, right? Talking about the conversation being very interesting, thanks to the ESG campaign, right? So now we're talking about solar and inverters, right? Talking about the mini grid, solar powers, inverters, powering our homes, powering the schools. And these are interesting conversations because that's what concerns us, right? Like you said, discussions in the World Economic Forum is different from the discussions we should be having here in Nigeria. And that's why these conversations are here. So if there are questions for you, we would like to pop that in, but just stay right on board. And we'll move straight on to Dr. David Editang, right? Dr. David, while discussing, right, we see how collaboration is important. We see how human capital, right, it's so important because there's a lot we can do together. From the African proverb you spoke about earlier, if you go alone, you might go fast, but when you go with some other people, you can go far, right? And we see that in a competitive environment, how can professionals leverage this, right, for impact and growth? We see you have multidisciplinary roles in ESG, requiring input from law, finance, technology. We spoke so much about technology and infrastructure, policy, right? So we have this different intersection between various disciplines. What role do cross-sector collaborations play? And how can professionals position themselves for this?
That's for me, right?
Yes, you, Dr. Editang,
okay,
go on.
All right, that's fine. Okay, I would say, like Joyce said, Miss Joyce talked about, and we all harmonize on that, on SMEs. And there are quite a number of roles. We talked about collaboration, but you will need to look at the constraint which that's like Doc said, we need to face it and say the truth. He said, "You want to hear the truth, listen to the truth." The truth is that let's say it as it is. That constraint, that basic constraint, and one of that is financial constraint, access to capital. And funding is also is a critical challenge in this in the energy industry. So this makes SMEs gives them limited access to bigger projects or bigger things, really access to funding. And because most of this funding, most of our banks, double-digit interest rates and the high collateral demands for bank and financial institutions. But how do we overcome this? There has to be a good knowledge of our regulatory framework. For instance, talking from the NCDMB point of view, you need to understand that you need to understand regulatory interventions. For instance, you have what we call the Nigerian Content Fund, and these are funds whereby people can leverage on. You have BOIs, and most of these funds are single interest rates. So SMEs need to understand what the requirements of these funds are, and approach these people. Next, they also have some funding which can support SME. It will be interesting to know most of these funds are single, not double interest rate, that single digit interest rate. They have favorable payment terms. Another thing we need to look at that is regulatory compliance barriers. SMEs needs to understand which, for the play in which they find themselves, they need to find out which regulatory compliance, or who are the regulators in such place. Are they the NUM? Are they NUPRC? Are we talking about NCDMB? You need to position yourself because before you go to have a handshake or a collaboration with a bigger corporation, you need to look at your tax paper. Your legal compliance should be at its best, and you need to stay updated with tax reforms, stay updated with regulatory information, invest in compliance, and invest in certification, and seek a network of opportunities like this where you know what is really involved, if there are repeals of laws, if there are change of law, if there are new laws that supports your business. Another thing that SMEs, I would want SMEs, one of the critical things that or is a barrier to SME. Most smaller guys or SMEs have limited industry visibility and networking gap. I talked about that. So what would be the solution? The solution would be join industry associations. You have for the oil and gas, you have PETAN, you have Nigerian Gas Association, you have WIN, you have Women in Energy. There are quite a number of them. Also attend industry events, because there you can have partnership. Like but I heard Ms. Joy talking about doctor that he raised up that she will have to meet him on the sidelines of the offline to discuss more. So never shy away for such opportunities like this. Also leverage on digital platforms. You have the LinkedIn, leverage seriously on digital platform. You can get OEMs, you can get partnership from such platform. Another thing SMEs need to know or need to take advantage of. Much of them lack, we're in a digital age, so every business or businesses write better on digital transformation. So you would need to invest in training, workforce development, adopt, innovative approach, look at strategic partnership. I would think that SME should move from the traditional survival mode. SME should approach partnership and collaboration with the right mindset, know what value they bring to the table, and they should be prepared, because collaboration in the future, I said our African forefathers were wise in that statement. Collaboration is indeed the future, and SME should be ready and must be ready to seize every opportunity this presents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from all we've discussed so far, I see participants are finding it interesting, and some might have some questions to ask. And like you said, the wisdom of our forefathers, collaboration is the future, Right. I have a question in the chat room, and I would like either you or Dr. Eddy, it wasn't addressed to a particular person, or like either you or Dr. Eddy to address it. And if Ms. Joy is on, if she wants to jump in, that's fine. It says, what are the most cost-effective ways for SMEs to integrate these ESG principles without straining their resources? Yeah, so
Well,
either of you can jump in. Yeah.
I mean, who would have a better answer? But I mean, in the Nigerian context, adhering to ESG principles is not entirely, depending on the question, or depending on scale, it's not entirely dependent on cost. There are very subtle ways of acknowledging ESG, and that is in simple things in your practices, in your processes, which largely sometimes depend on what licensing scheme it's operational within the country. So I think it's a function of having the right systems in place. But again, you want to have a system, an ESG acknowledgement system that is not just a tick box exercise. Because you see a lot of these things, and it's a question of, oh, I've done this, and it just becomes a tick box exercise, and it has to be ingrained. Here we use sort of meta regulatory structures to ingrain ESGs in such a way that there's a permissioning regime that makes you acknowledge ESG. So I'll give you, for example, in exploring for oil, there is now the question of Scope 3 emissions, for example, and how to acknowledge and even take account of Scope 3 emissions in your EIAs. Now, to some extent, that's not a problem, say in Nigeria. But again, it's beginning to think of those things. And even as long as as much as we want to continue exploiting our natural resources and our oil, are there sustainable ways that we can do them? Are there ways we can do them acknowledging, the environment, respecting, the environment in which we operate? But are there also ways in which we can, do it more sustainably? For example, having our power plants or our drilling rigs being powered by renewables, and that is something that is happening here. You would see, climate emissions reduction schemes and all of those things within the oil and gas industry. So we might be exporting for oil, but that entire system is being powered by, say, a wind turbine, for example, and it helps you offset the emissions in some way. So that's, of course, for large-scale oil and gas production, but in very subtle ways, even in our small businesses, ensuring or acknowledging the existence of these things and learning more about it, I think would play a significant role. It's not entirely, all about spending money.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dr. Eddy. And to add to what you've just said, right? We have small businesses thinking this is a big thing, right, for the big guys, and it will strain their budgets if they engage in it. But I think the first step, really, like what Dr. Eddy has said, identify your place. So where do you play? Are you a small business, an SME business? And what policy can you put in place to start implementing, right? Getting the knowledge, like Dr. Eddy said, understanding that ESG is about environmental, social, and governance. So you might be playing in the social space, not necessarily the environmental space. You might also be playing in the governance space and still ensuring your compliance. So issues like staff wages, staff salary have been seen as the social aspect of ESG compliance. So if you're in an organization where you ensure your staff are well taken care of, right? You see as being compliant in some way. So put up a policy and you can term it an ESG policy. So for my organization or your organization, this is what you have to do. And I can say this webinar also can fly in, or it can be termed an ESG compliance, because it's more like a knowledge sharing session. And I think if you start looking at it from that perspective, rather than seeing it as a big word for the big organizations, you really know how to fit in and not strain your resources. Dr. Editang, do you have anything to add to that question?
No, I would think that it's not really for the big companies, as you would see. It doesn't mean it doesn't really have to do with the word ESG, but I think every company should look at this framework. You can, put it also as it fits you, into your, model it up to your play, where you play, and what industry you play, and your structure. You don't have to be a multinational to have this framework operationalized within your process. So look at this framework and see how it can be adaptable. The question, the singular word is adaptability. You can adapt it into your own business framework, but I'm sure that you'll be very, very grateful you did. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's also another question here. I want to read it out. It says, many Nigerian companies see ESG as mere ticking the box. Many big companies cancel contracts without respect for service agreements. What are the penalties for non-compliance? And which body is responsible for the ombudsman? I think, Dr. Editang, you can just continue from there. Should I take it again?
Sorry, can you take it again? Take it again, please.
All right. So it says, basically, acknowledging what we've said earlier, says many big companies cancel contracts without respect for service agreements, right? So what are penalties for non-compliance? So assuming these companies cancel contracts without following the agreement, the service agreement, what penalties would you advise for non-compliance, and which body is responsible?
Mute. I would say that basically we do not categorically. That's why we have regulatory bodies for, maybe, for instance, you have regulatory body for NDPRA, you have for NCDMB, you have for any. We don't have that kind of government established body. But most multinationals now are incorporating ESG to most of the contract requirements or the registration requirements. So you might shoot yourself in the feet if you don't comply, because most of this because SMEs does business with IOCs, and IOC's operationality is bordering on ESG, the framework. So they also want the SME doing business with them, to have this within the scope. So it might not be a penalty, as it were, but it might make you lose the chances of getting playing big within that IOC. You understand? It might reduce your chances of maybe winning big jobs, or playing it big within that system. So you might want to you might shoot your feet while trying to avoid working within this framework. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And before we come to you, Dr. Eddy, I see a situation where many SMEs just pick a contract agreement from the IOCs or the big guys without really taking time to read through, or even maybe contacting the professionals, the legal practitioners to read through with them to ensure the necessary clauses are there, right? Because even now, if you don't want to look at litigation, arbitration panels are there, mediation panels are there. So you have other aspects that you can use without using regulations, right, to tie them down to respect their agreement. But Dr. Eddy, what are your thoughts?
No, absolutely. But again, there's sometimes you would have contracts, with risk allocation clauses, for example, in the sense that depending on what the risk is, even if you did something to me, I cannot sue you. All right. So those are risk allocation clauses. So you'd find that in a lot of oil and gas contracts where everyone just says basically bury your losses. That's basically the principles. They are called knock for knock. So you might find things like knock for knock, indemnity clauses saying, sorry, if I do something wrong to you, or my staff does something wrong to your staff, sorry, don't be offended, go home, and so bury your losses. So you see circumstances like that. And depending on the level of the contract or the risks, people put that in a clause. And in some circumstances, they even have it as a community. So they come together and they all have a mutual hold harmless deed, for example. And within that deed, everybody who has signed onto that deed and eventually gets to work together would eventually bury their losses. So they then become part of the knock for knock conversation. I'm mindful of time, but I just wanted to pick on the next question by Deborah on how can businesses balance sustainability goals and profitability in industry that rely heavily on natural resources.
Yes.
And I think that's a conversation that is fundamental. You need to recognize that sustainability to a very large extent will give you profit. All right, that if you do things properly, if you apply ESG, it should be factored into your cost. And if you're going to be doing business without that, then the business is not yet profitable. Okay, so take safety of your staff, for example, and all of those things. Have you looked at how many people die from oil tanker explosions? Have you just thought of it? So the data is sketchy, but they're about between 2009 and 2025 and 2024, about 1,600 people have died from tanker explosions. And that's because you have, of course, that's a bad thing, but that's because sometimes you have these tankers, people are not sleeping, people don't have rest, they are working back to back and carrying really, really hazardous chemicals. So, as much as you're thinking of it, now imagine the amount of lawsuits that would go from 1,600 people and the compensation. Now, if things were done properly, put that into the cost. So if you cannot do your business with the recognitions or considerations of those ESG implications, to the extent that they become profitable, then you shouldn't even be doing the business in the first place. Whether it's oil and gas, whether is anything, whether you're small, you're large, it doesn't work. Factor your ESG as part of the cost. Once you've made profit in adhering to that, then it becomes a profitable business. And I do acknowledge the tensions between profit, cost and all of these things and the cost implications of adhering to it. But like I said, it should be factored into it, from day one. And hopefully, people are becoming more aware of the role that these things, ESG and sustainability, plays in enhancing not just your reputation, but overall success of the business.
Thank you very much. It's been an interesting conversation so far, and having our eyes on the time also. I think we will start wrapping up these conversations, but so far it's been interesting, right? And as a way of recap, right, I'll just want to mention some of the things that has been spoken about here, right? The energy transition conversation is an interesting one, and it's more like a shift from one source of energy to the other, right? And that there are many scenarios that play out in this energy transition that Nigerians should watch out for and see how to leverage on them. And we looked at the resources, the technology, the energy needs, that we should pay attention to our own energy needs and own them, right? Own our energy needs, be more innovative, and right, we talked about being very proactive in our thinking as well, and see how we can resolve our energy poverty, right? We talked about governance, that it should be data-driven, what are the ratios, and it should also be measurable, right? Talked about the energy dilemma and the political will, having changing the dynamics and the energy transition discussions, right? We looked at the transnational energy still a source and the ripple effects of imposed transition, right? So we've had these interesting conversations, which I believe, as much as I have a full notes, our participants also have their notes full. And Dr. Editang took the conversation upward into collaboration, networking, and all of that. But as a way of parting words, right, there might be some professionals here looking at pivoting into the energy sector, into the energy industry, and thinking what skills should they possess. I know Dr. Editang mentioned a few, But I'd like you to add to the conversation. Are there specific skills, right? Looking at it from the professionals looking forward to jackpine, as it were, right? Being proactive, like Dr. Eddy was, or the professionals staying here, like Dr. Editang, and possessing their possession in Nigeria, and at the same time traveling globally to tap what other nations are doing. So just basically, as a way of parting words, closing remarks. Thank you. Starting with Dr. Eddy. Let's start with you. You're muted.
Yeah. So I think from the conversation again, first thanks Debbie for the opportunity. I think we could look at externally, there are lots of drivers to the energy transition. But if we look back at a country like Nigeria, I start to think what sectors have really grown and blossomed. I saw the records that I think Spotify paid about 50 billion, to Nigerian artists in 2024. And you start thinking of what sectors have blossomed. Those were sectors that were organically driven by the citizens, by young people. And if there is a big problem within that system, then I think the drivers should equally be, people like you and I. We should take the bull by the horn, try how to solve our energy crisis problem. In that sense, the energy transition, right, becomes driven by the quest and the desire to solve our energy crisis problem. Okay? Because we would not be able to do it with oil because it's a point resource. So we don't have the accessibility to it. But you and I can build a wind turbine, can build solar panels, can do all of these things and solve our energy crisis problem. People are putting inverters and all of these things already at home, but we can scale it. All right. And so, as much as people try to argue on, climate change, we haven't polluted, you have polluted, I think those arguments are largely simplistic. The main reason for energy transition in countries like Nigeria would be to solve the energy crisis problem. And if we solve the energy crisis problem, then we have increased economic activities and development overall. And so, I think, a more radical and organic approach will be required. And at the heart of that are those principles of ESG. But thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Eddy, for joining us. So now we move to Dr. Editang. Closing remarks. I know Dr. Eddy took some time, but just keep it short. We're out of time.
All right. So mine will be find a passion, and within the energy dilemma, find the passion, because it needs to be driven by passion and it has to be native inside of you. So find the passion, look for a passion, because I think not really what you studied, but the passion should drive and should be natively, captured. So a passion drives, within the energy play or the ecosystem, look for a passion that can drive, result. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Ms. Joy is still on. If you're on, one closing remark from you. But if not, thank you very much. I'm very appreciative of this conversation. I see in the comments someone actually acknowledging that as an engineer, he enjoyed the conversation, right? And the fact that it's multidisciplinary is something he really enjoyed. So as a closing remark, Dr. Eddy shared that you should, look inwards, right? Be very innovative and drastic in your thinking. Let's make our wind turbine. And I'm sure those that are interested in making their wind turbine, they will start sourcing out for that knowledge and see how they can start. And I'm sure Dr. Eddy will be open to support as much as possible for everyone interested. And Dr. Editang concluded beautifully that you should find your passion. So if your passion is in making that energy turbine, go for it. If your passion is in going for business and looking out for other innovative ways to solve this energy problem, go for it. So thank you very much. On that note, I'll say we're grateful to all speakers. Oh, Ms. Joy is here. Okay, let's hear a closing remark.
Oh, closing remark. It's I want to. Okay, I want to leverage on passion that has already been said. I want to use one of a very close friend of mine. I'm juggling within two things right now. So my very good friend, Deborah Fade. I'm very proud of her. She just won the Energy Heroes Award at the C4 conference in Barbados recently. It was driven by passion. So she was driven by passion to come up with this is it Vector IO. It's a portable energy solution, and it's a system that she sells. So we all have an enthusiasm to solve the energy
The
poverty
problem.
in
Yeah.
our regional climate, and everybody is coming into it from a different perspective. My role is
Yeah.
to look for investors, entrepreneurs, and that are interested in investing, seeing it as a so long we can give them off-takers that are willing to take the solutions that they are bringing in. I practically facilitate the relationship between governments and these investors, and that's why I'm in the West. So basically,
Wow.
we all
Interesting.
have to play our roles. And I would tell
Yeah.
young people, read, read, find a mentor to hold your hand. Because if you have somebody holding your hand through this process, you will go far. Other than me, that took me almost 15, 16 years to get to a place in an industry that I have already played around for many years. But now I am seeing myself as a voice. And we don't have
Yeah.
many women in the energy space. So please, we are open to encouraging more women, which is part of one of the deliverables under the social aspect of ESG, is that gender inclusion. We need more women in the energy sector, either in clean energy, traditional energy, however you want to come into. Energy is energy. Energy is in different facets. So we encourage more people to come in on board, and let's collaboratively drive this solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hear you say read, read, read. It's so important, and that cannot be overemphasized. We've shot so much of the time, but I'm really, really grateful. And one thing you also mentioned, Ms. Joy, is mentorship. And I believe the speakers are open. Everyone that are looking forward to contacting them, their profile have been posted in the chat box. You can tap on them and contact them. So thank you very much, Dr. Eddy Wifa, Dr. Editang, David, and Ms. Joy. You've made this conversation worthwhile. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much also to our participants. Without you and your active participation, this webinar wouldn't have been successful the way it has been so far. So I really want to thank you very much. Thank you for joining us and look forward to our subsequent webinars. We look forward to your participation as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thank
All right.
you, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.